G'day everyone, welcome back to the Talking Leadership podcast series. My name is Eric Perez. Thank you for joining me again. Today I'm meeting with an individual who has an interesting work background and understands the leadership issue from multiple different perspectives. So I'm very much looking forward to the discussion today. He brings many decades of experience in the local government sector and is currently the Chief Executive Officer of Grey Matta Solutions. Can I welcome to the podcast Chris Phillips? How are you, mate?
Good, thank you, Eric.
Mate, thank you for joining me. So let's start at why leadership and how did you get into that leadership space, Chris?
Yeah, good question. I was probably pushed into leadership rather than chose to go in there. I was thinking about this question and going right back to school days. And I remember vividly in the second last year of school, the principal of the school sitting me down and saying, "Chris, we'd like you to be school captain next year." And my first response was no. And he was quite shocked by it, to say the least, that I would turn it down. Anyway, he spent the afternoon convincing me that I was worthy of being school captain. Not a huge school or anything like that. And it's going back in the day where that sort of role was, as much as anything, was the public face. So it was speaking at the Anzac Day events and at awards nights and those sorts of things. And, you know, the old upholding the school spirit. I actually didn't see myself as a leader, but obviously there was a cohort of teachers that did. So that was where the journey started. I always knew in leadership that, or what we now term leadership, back then it wasn't actually a widely used term. What I understood it was about other people, not about you. So the fact that other people recognise leadership in you is their right. Okay, that leadership is as much about fellowship as it is about leadership. So that was a big lesson to me, and I stumbled through that for the year, made lots of mistakes. My mother said to me I had to learn to get a poker face because I was too expressive at times in my facial expressions behind the scenes. All those things that you do wrong when you're young. But yeah, that's where it all started, Eric.
Chris, your definition of leadership?
Quite simply, it's creating an environment for others to succeed. So it's not about you.
Everyone that I've spoken to has a slightly different variation on the definition. So there is no right and wrong here. It's for me, I need to learn. I'm not as quick on the uptake as some people, so I need to ask questions to help my own learning get along here. And the creating the environment for others to succeed and grow. Of all those definitions and the people that you've grown up around and worked with, why that one? Why did that pull on your heartstrings as being the thing that is about core leadership for you?
It ties to one of your other questions about measuring success, I think, Eric. If we look at all, and we were having this chat off air, if we look at all the definitions of success and how we measure success in life, in my opinion, it's not work and life, it is all life. If we have someone that can enable us and remove roadblocks, speed bumps, those sorts of things, encourage us, make us feel valued, heard, safe, all those pieces, then they're a true leader. So if I look at across the leaders that I've had, up until about 8 or 9 years ago, I'd honestly call them all managers, not leaders. They were in leadership roles, but they were KPI focused. They weren't personal development focused. They weren't looking at how I could contribute to success. So they weren't creating an environment where I could succeed and therefore they succeeded, if that makes sense. So I firmly believe, and I do it with my team here, I work with them. They don't work for me. I meet them where they're at and what they need. If they need a chat, they need a chat, and we have it. If they need to vent, they need to vent. If they need a perspective on how to do something from my lengthy experience, I'll give them a perspective, but I won't tell them what to do. I'll just help them develop and grow. And they're bringing expertise to the table. It makes me look good if they're good.
One of the things you bring up there, and I think it's important when you're dealing with other adult human beings in any leadership role, in any organization is trusting that the person you're dealing with or your teams have got expertise and they know what they're doing. They could just be looking for that signpost that says, yeah, the track I'm on is the right one, or, oh no, maybe I didn't consider X, Y, Z. Yeah, thanks for that. And that's kind of your role as the leader. Whereas there is no issue with someone being a highly technical operations KPI focused manager.
No.
They're just not doing that process of leadership. And if that means that individual is not helping develop their team or develop the environment in which they're working, which you alluded to, or not alluded to, that you said before, that, yeah, they're doing something, but it's not necessarily the process of leadership or leading in their own right. So that makes a lot of sense to me. Now, Chris, the next area, and this is one that I'm building more of an interest in, because there is a purpose to having a leader or leaders in an organization, is that you're decision makers. And so that term lonely road of leadership, not mine, but I like using it. And so is it a lonely pathway, or as lonely as you make it, Chris?
It's as lonely. I firmly believe it's as lonely as you make it. I too use the term, particularly I do a lot of executive coaching for CEOs and founders and so on. And I leverage the fact that it's lonely at the top. But my challenge, I guess, is to anyone, is we can very quickly replace the word lonely with exciting, fulfilling. It's pretty special to not literally light a fire under someone, but to ignite their passion and watch them take off. And you have to get out of their road as they take off. I just reckon that takes any of the loneliness thoughts out of it, because it feels special.
I think the assumption there, and I'll challenge me on this if you'd like to, mate, because this is a conversation. So we'll take it down this track a little bit. It'll be exciting for someone who's about developing other people. If you're a leader that's focused on achieving goals, and then people are a secondary consideration, then maybe it's not so exciting. It's just part of a process, where the delineation you've made there is, for some, being able to watch subordinates surpass your skill sets and maybe be ready to go to take that next role somewhere else, or to do something different, is part of that growth journey. Does that make sense?
It certainly does. And that's where we can't isolate leadership per se. We have to look at our success measures, and they can overlap. And of course, the next thing we were going to discuss is measuring success in leadership. And success, by definition, is collective result, right? So it's partly you can be the total technocrat, as long as you don't get and the boss, if you like, as long as you don't get in the way of other people by being that technically sound. So that's the slight nuance, the move from a technical leader to a people leader, and they both go hand in hand. So our tagline for Grey Matta Solutions is "Success is human." We can't achieve anything without human beings contributing and the collective results we get from it. So you can be KPI driven, but you must recognise that you won't achieve KPIs by yourself.
Do you think you've learned more from leaders with bad process or leaders with great process? Where's the learning been for you?
Majority is with bad process, and that's partly, of course, the way our brains work. We've got a huge negative bias. So otherwise the media wouldn't have a gig, would they? Right? So because we've got such a focus on the negative view, it's very easy to go there. And I think the positives have been more subtle, and that because they've allowed behavioural growth in me, it's not as evident. Whereas a bad leader, the negatives are evident, and it's generally where you've been prevented from doing something that you're particularly passionate about or believe is the right direction, or there's a number of things there. So the learnings, and we find, particularly with young, as we're developing as a business, young leaders, it's much easier for them to reflect on what hasn't worked well rather than what has worked well. But you ultimately get to that so that they know what doesn't work, right?
The build up to the next topic area, Chris, is around leader capabilities, and this is where I have an interest, not just as a someone who's talking and creating content around this, but from a research perspective as well. What do you believe are the most critical leader capabilities you've encountered in what you might term effective leaders?
I mentioned before three words, and they're the premise behind my business, about creating an environment where people feel valued, where they feel heard, and where they feel safe. So to be a good leadership, for someone to feel valued, they need to understand where they fit and what they contribute in whatever it is that they're doing at that juncture, whether it be the bigger picture of the business or a particular project or a particular task. A good leader needs to have and look, pretty much this is understanding human behaviour and what floats majority of people's boat. The herd part is they need to be allowed and encouraged to have a voice. That's not about them being right. That's not about them getting their own way. It's not about hanging them out to dry and them being wrong or any of that sort of thing. We're tribal by nature and we contribute through our voice. So we need to be heard, and that's heard to be understood rather than heard to be just straight heard. The other behaviour that I see for a good leader is creating that environment where they're safe to do the other two. And we hear a lot of rhetoric about failing fast, failing quickly, move on. It's okay to make mistakes as long as you learn from them. All those bits and pieces. But it has to be an environment where they feel comfortable. People feel comfortable because this is the development of trust in a team, in an organisation. It's really important that they feel as though everything that they do will be logically considered rather than emotionally considered. So they're not going to say something and be sacked for saying it if it's appropriate, obviously. There's things behind it. So creating that valued, heard and safe environment is the capabilities of a really good leader. You'll have variances in that where the safe environment is a case in point. We know full well there's a whole lot of legislation around safety in general, and we're making a big push at the moment into mental health and psychological safety and those sorts of things. So that's a morphing field, and we'll have some restrictions on it or some expectations around it, what safe looks like. We also have a range of abilities of leaders in those spaces. Some can get analysis paralysis because they're so busy hearing what everyone's saying and creating an environment of collaboration. And so it's a balance,
This space is going to change longer term. I'm fascinated by this idea that we have to now think about as part of your leadership toolkit, whatever that toolkit might include, the creation of or the maintenance of a psychologically safe space. That for me can be fraught with danger because the workplace is a social arena and the leader is not part of every social interaction in that space. And so where I think this will get dicey and potentially legally dicey is two employees have a cracking go at each other and say some really inappropriate stuff. You weren't there to witness it. If you've created a safe psychological space and they've gone at it, then to what degree are you culpable for incidents of that nature? And it could be an innocuous discussion that's gone wrong versus something in an area that is just unacceptable. For example, sexist comments, racial comments, things that are not appropriate in any workspace that, you can make a space as psychologically safe as you can, and there will still be human beings that are so stupid that they will say and do and behave in ways that are just not appropriate to the context. So again, I'm talking macro level. I think it's a fascinating space. What the rules around that, how that will play out will be interesting because however it plays out, leaders will either choose to shape what that looks like or they will have to just enable it and consider reviewing in their own workplaces what that might look like. So, yeah.
It's a classic case, isn't it, that and we often see this, we wait for a legislation to come out to tell us what to do rather than applying the legislation and being really clear on what the boundaries are. And that's a leadership function, is building that space so people know when it's appropriate and not appropriate. They know if and when there's consequences for inappropriate. They create an environment where they're rewarding good behaviours, not just calling out bad. We have a program called Catching People Out, where we encourage people to build on those things that they want to see more of by calling it out. Don't just wait for someone to do the wrong thing. There's all those. That's why early on I talk about it as creating the environment. There's certain rules around that environment, and that's the other thing that we need. Our brains need in particular is certain. So we need to know the space that we can play, and our people need to know the spaces that they can play and not play. What's appropriate, what's not, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and that's mate, we could go down the rabbit hole of that one, but we won't, because this podcast is about you. So let me get us back on track. And the next question's around. No. Look, I'm guilty in a lot of these podcasts, because I know that there are discussions linked to leadership that we could spend a lot of time doing. What I meant to say is you've helped me identify another area that will potentially become a hot button discussion area, because that intersection of what is the leader truly accountable for and what his or her people are accountable for is amazingly interesting to me. Like I think naively, I think when you go to the workplace, there has to be that sense of what common sense is when you walk through the door. And the last thing I would want to see, and let's use we'll use myself as an example. Let's call him Mr. Smith, walks into his workplace and drops a racial slur that shouldn't be dropped. That and someone of that racial group takes offense. Obviously, there's very little wriggle room there to say, look, how can we talk to you about not saying that stuff anymore? You just said it for whatever reason, and suddenly a person's taken offense, and you're like, how do you control for some very basic things that shouldn't be said, or interactions that shouldn't happen in a workplace? Sexist comments is another one that comes to mind, and these things, as much as I would hope don't happen, probably happen in most modern workplaces on a regular basis. And I think where the art of what people like you do and other leaders that I've spoken to is, how do you navigate that to get an outcome that addresses the needs of the person that's been aggrieved in the process and the person who's maybe potentially stepped over a line? And I think where this gets interesting, at least for me, is if there's a process in your business to deal with it, then everyone gets hopefully some procedural fairness. But in a lot of businesses, there is no process to deal with it, and you can jump to outcomes or punishments almost immediately, and that's not good either, because there could be some context to what led to X, Y, Z. So like I said,
absolutely. Often we treat the symptom, not the cause, and we look at even the whole space of domestic violence. We're symptom dealing at the moment rather than getting behind it and looking at working with what's behind it. And some of our cultural challenges, cultural issues, and cultural inappropriateness, there's more behind it than there is that we're seeing manifest in a comment, a slur, or something totally inappropriate.
So, Chris, the nature versus nurture question: are leaders born or are they made?
It's a great question, and my backstory would suggest that maybe it was nature, because I didn't recognise it. But there is no doubt that unnurtured and unactioned to remain contemporary in leadership, as our understanding of human behaviour, human brain in particular, increases daily, that if we don't nurture it, then we've got nothing.
Is there a nuance there? I'd love to get your feedback on this. I believe people choose to be a leader or they choose not to be. Is it as binary as that? Or is it, if you give someone the environment to think about that choice before they make it, then maybe they will be better informed before they make that choice? So I always think it's a binary. Some people have got leadership skill sets that they've just got this X factor, but being a leader to them is the last thing they ever want to do. They just want to do their job and go home. They don't want any of the responsibility. Yet for some that you might meet that don't have those X factors, really want to try at the skill of being a leader and want to give it a go and develop themselves. So what's your thinking around that?
It's interesting for me. What you define leadership as becomes the real point. In Australia, we go, particularly in a work sense, we go for roles from a monetary sense as we progress. We look at a hierarchy and believe that, not everyone, but a lot of people believe that they need to become CEO, right? And there's a pathway to doing that. I don't think they sit there in the initial stages, and I certainly didn't sit there in the initial stages and say, I'm going to grab this position because I can do leadership. I'm going to grab that position because at my stage in my life, I need extra money in the bank account because I've kids coming or buying a house or whatever. I'll make do with the rest of it. That whatever the role throws at me, I'll do it because I firmly believe technically I can. I know enough about it to do it. I challenge the thought that people sit back and say, I'm going to take that role as because I'm going to be a leader. I think back to the roles I played in kids' sport, it was usually thrust upon you because no one else would do it. And it needed to be done. So you then made a fist of whatever it was, whether it was a coach or a trainer or a secretary or whatever. It's just because someone needed to do the role. And then the rest of it came with it and you made a fist of it. I don't think there's too many people out there that actually truly consider the leadership, and we don't promote what the leadership element is of a different role.
What I've heard from previous guests is in situations where you get someone who's a highly technical expert in an area in a business suddenly gets tapped on the shoulder and they're asked to become a manager or a leader of a section, and it's nothing that they ever wanted, to that reluctant leadership story that you're telling, but the owners of the business or the CEO wants to promote you and it's the last thing you ever wanted to do. So it's at that point you've got to make a decision. And like you said, if it's potentially more money or it moves you to something different, yes. But I think what has come up quite often is there is sometimes very little consideration given to the people element of being in a leadership role, which is away from the technical. And that I think happens more often than not because there's a Machiavellian thing from the head of the business to say, hey, I'm going to make your life difficult. I think there's just an assumption if you've been in a place for a certain amount of time that you understand the dynamics of the business, and that includes the people, whereas I think that's sometimes a very dangerous assumption to make. But it happens. I mean, it happens.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The only true industry I've come across that allows for the technical to remain truly technical is the NASA model of management, where you've got rocket scientists, right? And because it's a circular model, the person that's actually leading the team of rocket scientists, so to speak, is not necessarily the highest paid person, but they're the highest skilled in that, as are the rocket scientists highest skilled in theirs, and often the highest paid as a result. There's room for both. And your point about founders and CEOs wanting to reward people, we need to include the people we're wanting to reward in what reward looks like.
Looking back on your career, and I'm not saying it's over by any stretch of the imagination, what would you... What would you say to a younger version of Chris Phillips about being a more effective leader?
The one piece of advice I'd give would be to listen to others more. And that can be an observation rather than the true hearing, being told piece, so that you're looking for what works well earlier rather than just pushing through. I've done, through my career, I've had a lot of positions where I've just pushed through, right? Where because of my position and my thoughts around how decision-making works, that often I created an environment that slowed things down rather than sped things up. The second thing, and second most important thing, would be make a decision when you need to make a decision. There's no, it'll be based, as long as you base it on intel, on data, and then be prepared if that data changes to change your decision. That'd be the two key things, Eric, I think.
No worries, Chris. Chris, before we go, what do you do at Grey Matta Solutions and how can people get in touch with you, mate?
We've obviously got a website and all the socials for Grey Matta Solutions. So that's probably, the website is probably the easiest way to get in touch. Matta is spelled M-A-T-T-A. What we do is we help businesses grow through their people. So we do leadership, we do strategy, we do all sorts of things, all people related, all based in neuroscience, human behaviour, all back-ended by that. So as you can appreciate, it changes regularly with the way technology is growing and our understanding of humans and the human brain. So it's a terribly exciting space, and we love to see businesses succeed and people succeed, obviously.
Chris Phillips, CEO of Grey Matta Solutions, thank you for your time, mate.
Thank you, Eric. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, everyone, for listening. This has been the Talking Leadership podcast. Thanks, everyone, and I'll catch you all on the next podcast.